So please give an absolutely bananas welcome for Tiffany Markman.
If I stand behind the thingy, you won't see me, so I'm gonna stand right here. Hello. I feel that having come from Johannesburg to attend 2 conferences, of which this is the second, that I've already got my money's worth from the 4 speakers before me. So even if everything else goes to shit, it was worth it. Having said that, I am going to try my best to give you really good value for the next 20 minutes or so. The best way to explain what we're going to do together is to take you back 10 days to Joburg. I was having coffee with one of my lifelong friends. His name is Yankee. No, he is not an American. It's a nickname. And he asked me, he's not a copywriter, he's a restaurateur, and he asked what I was doing at this conference. What is copywriting about, and why am I speaking at the Royal College of Physicians? And I explained to him that I'm coming to talk about coming up with creative ideas when you've got nothing. When you're under the gun, when you're anxious, when you're stressed, when the client is whining at you, when you've got multiple deadlines that all crash into each other at the same time because all the quote approvals came through simultaneously after they made you wait for 4 months. And the example that I was able to give him was based on what was in front of me at the time. So we were at a coffee shop called Bricks. It's a very chic, sort of hipster place. I was the oldest person in the room by a lot. And at Bricks, they serve the coffee in Le Creuset mugs. And so I had one in front of me, half empty. And I slugged down the dregs that were left, and I said to him, this is a mug. Okay, right way up, it's a mug. It has coffee in it. It makes me a happy person. But if you flip it on its side, it becomes a portal to another universe. Okay, especially because there's caffeine in there, which I need in order to exist in this universe. And it really makes me think of what Ame said when you quoted the Zen proverb. You said, change the way you see it, or change how you see it. That's one of the techniques that I'm going to teach you today as part of my micro-focus methodology. But of course, we can't stop at just one flip. If you turn it that way, it looks like a handbag. And if you zoom in really, really closely, it looks like a sunset. And under the gun, I could probably come up with 5 shit creative ideas and 1 decent one using this under pressure if I needed to. Money is also a very good motivator, and I don't like to be hungry. But to bring this back to our clients, can anyone tell me what this is? Yep. Okay, good. I can hear a buzz. This is the Ever Given. It's a 400-meter-long container ship. In March 2021, it became stuck in the Suez sideways with the bow and stern lodged and blocking opposing sides. So global trade was blocked for 6 days, 369 ships queuing to get in and or out. This has no real relationship to my life whatsoever, except that I had 2 clients who both wanted thought leadership content that referenced the Suez blockage at the same time, one in Switzerland, one in the US, totally different industries. And I had to come up with a creative idea, but everyone had already said everything. Everyone had already spoken to death about the ship and the global trade problems and the 7.9 billion pounds in lost revenue, and there was no way to come up with anything really good. And then I started to think about knives, forks, and spoons. So you can see there's a lot of food stuff happening in my talk. I did some research, and it turns out that the UK is one of the biggest importers of cutlery in the world, and there was a 2.6 million pound import blockage of knives, forks, and spoons during March 2021, which meant that restaurants and hotels were unable to give people cutlery to eat their food with. Now, this is just an example of how a global trade crisis can be zoomed in on so much that it then becomes relevant and resonant to a large number of people in very small ways. And this is the best example I can give you of micro-focus. But don't worry, I'll give you lots. You're going to take away lots of ideas. So if you don't already have a writing implement in your hand, best you get one. The knives, forks, and spoons analogy is the way that I explain finding the smallest possible thing that affects the largest possible number of people. I would like to pretend that my micro-focus methodology is what I've been using for the last 20 years of my career to come up with creative ideas, but that's complete bullshit. I've been using it for 15 years without knowing what it was called, and then 3 years ago I decided to start teaching it to people, so I had to give it a name, and then I reverse engineered it into this talk. And of course, at this point, while I'm confessing secrets to you, I must confess that every single image in my slides comes to me courtesy of Tatsuya Tanaka and Slinkerchu, both exceptional Japanese miniaturists. So just a shout out to them now and again at the end, because their work is quite exquisite. So that's confession one. Confession two is that I reverse engineered the micro-focus methodology because I wanted something that would make a lot of sense in a conference environment. And so here we are with the 3 steps, which I will teach you. Like Sam, who spoke earlier this morning, I have golden rules. He had 6, I have 1. I don't know if that's a sign of sort of mediocrity or whatever, but as we know, good enough is good enough. Thank you, Lorraine. So I'm going to give you my 1 golden rule, which is, in trying to be creative as writers, and as communicators, and as thinkers, and as speakers, and designers, social media community managers, whatever it might be, either say something that has never been said before by anyone, which is bloody hard to do unless you're Dave Harland, or say something unoriginal in a completely original way. That's much easier. So instead of trying to be the first to say things, to scoop the world, which cannot be done, let's try and find original ways to say admittedly unoriginal things. Now, for those of you who are in corporate and commercial work like me, so it might be fintech, it might be education, it might be law, engineering, whatever, writing for those industries, we sometimes feel like we've said everything that can possibly be said. That's why we need to be able to spin things in a weird way. So let's start with what human beings find interesting. Okay? What do human beings find interesting? I find bats interesting. Some people find string theory interesting, whereas I can't even remember the very complicated things that you find interesting, but they were very impressive. People find different things interesting, but there are 6 sort of standard things that most people find interesting. Humor, interactivity, story, passion, variety, and my favorite one, analogy. And analogy is the one that I'm going to be using most, although I will try and be funny, but my husband says I'm not funny, and I always cock up the joke because I forget the end. So I'm going to try to resist humor and just go with analogy, which is what the micro-focus methodology is based on. And so there are 3 parts to micro-focus, 3 different ways to approach the creative idea. The first I like to call the shrink. And it's about zooming in and in and in relentlessly until you find the small thing that resonates with the largest number of people, like the Suez Canal blockage becoming about knives, forks, and spoons, like the Le Creuset coffee mug being turned on its side and becoming something else. And really the best manifestation or application for the shrink technique is when you take something that relates to many, to a multitude, and you make it about one, many to one. So by this I mean behind the scenes, a day in the life. You create an archetype or a persona for a particular campaign, and you craft a lot of creative content around that persona. So let me give you an example of Illy's. One of my clients is an insurance company. They were trying to come up with a way to convey their EVP, their employee value proposition, to existing staff and new staff. And the boring way that it's done in South Africa is it's a horrible document that talks about maternity leave and paternity leave and benefits and medical cover and dental, and it's boring, no one reads it. You know, it's usually a bit of a fail. I don't know if it's much the same here, but the document that lays out your benefits is normally dreadful. Although many of us are self-employed, so we've never had a benefit in our whole lives. So we created Elise. Elise doesn't exist. But I personified her as if she was. She's 38 years old. She's a single mom. She lives in a suburb of Johannesburg called Constantia Kloof. She does park runs on the weekend. She has a son. She's got a couple of close friends in the office. I described her commute to work. I described her chair. I described her coffee. I spoke about the incentive program that's built into the business. I spoke about how they celebrate and honor birthdays. It worked so well that Elise became a sort of a real part of the business. We gave her an email address. She wrote a blog that appeared on the internet. She had a birthday, which was celebrated by the employees. And eventually we hired an actor to create life-size cutouts of Elise and put them all over the place. So that's what I mean by creating an archetype. But you don't have to do it for humans only. You can do it for dogs. Brevecto is a tick and flea product. I'm sure I saw someone with an MSD badge. There we go. So Brevecto comes to us from MSD Animal Health. And I was asked to write a 30-second radio commercial to sell tick and flea products for dog owners. Now, it's kind of hard to do that in 30 seconds, but we created Rex. And we created an archetype.
Oh, Mom! Oh, Dad, it's Rex. I think I have fleas. And I'm scratching like crazy. While you're out, please pick up some Brevecto. 12 weeks of tick and flea protection. 12 weeks! All the other dogs in the neighborhood have it. And trust me, I need it. Wait, is that a tick? Hurry!
Don't wait for your dog to beg. Get Brevecto from your vet. One tasty chew. 12 weeks of tick and flea protection. 0 worries. For more information, contact your vet or MSD Animal Health.
Oh, bravo, Brevecto.
Much more interesting than just giving features and benefits in a radio ad. Here's one of yours, for those of you who are local. This was after the pandemic, British Airways trying to convince people to fly again. They went from many to one, and then to many again, coming up with 512 individual executions that answered the question, what is the purpose of your travel? So the old options used to be business or leisure. But British Airways, the agency that came up with this on behalf of British Airways, took a completely different approach to many to one. And they were very, very clever in the application of this campaign, which was only outdoor. This one I feel in my soul. I've spent the last 4 days on the tube, and I feel this one with every fiber of my being. I don't quite know what is happening here, but it's cute. And that should give you something to use when trying to think about the shrink. So many to one, and then to many again if you like, or just stay with the one, the Rex, the Elise, the single archetype. That was the shrink. Number 2, the rabbit hole. This is when we dig so far into research that we find interesting overlaps where we didn't necessarily think that overlaps existed. So we do research, we find connections based on that research, and then we say to ourselves, what could this be similar to? May I introduce the Shelmet? The Shelmet comes to us from Hokkaido in Japan, an island that goes through 40,000 tons of discarded scallop shells per year as a result of a thriving seafood restaurant industry. They've combined the discarded scallop shells with plastic to create shell stick, and they've then used the structure of a shell to create a helmet that is 30% stronger than an unribbed version. Quite amazing. That's what happens when you do research and go down research rabbit holes. You come up with ideas that would never have occurred to you otherwise. I think this is just the coolest thing ever, and of course it comes in pink. It has applications for all sorts of things, bike helmet, PPE, and so on. Clever. An example of mine, I have a client who's in retail DIY. They're a Southern African chain, so South Africa and its neighboring countries. And one of the biggest sellers in the group is what we call a creepy, which is a pool vacuum. So in South Africa, we are plagued with 360 days of sunshine a year. And so we are constantly tormented by trying to keep our swimming pools clean. And of course, my client wanted to sell more pool vacuums to pool owners. And so we did a lot of psychographic research, and we discovered that the kind of people who spend money on pool vacuums like to be outdoors. They are family people. They like to have experiences and moments and make memories. They tend to be people who go to the bush. What we call going to the bush is what you would call going on safari. And South Africans do this a lot. And so we created a campaign based on the results of research, which showed that like the pool vacuum, there is an animal, the West African manatee, that crawls around at the bottom of beds of water, sucking up the debris and detritus, like a pool vacuum. And we created a campaign inspired by the West African manatee, but using connections we found through research. That's really what South Africa looks like. Shameless plug, come visit. There are all sorts of places you can look for connections: weather, pop culture, films, books, and so on. But the important thing to bear in mind is never to lose sight of the main point, because sometimes as creatives we find an idea that is so cool that we are wedded to it no matter how shit it actually might be. And it's such a weird, obtuse connection between what we want to say and the creative idea that the client doesn't get it or the audience doesn't get it. So never lose sight of the main point. And finally, number 3 of the 3, so number 1 being the shrink, number 2 being the rabbit hole, number 3 is the leap. This is where you ask what if. So it's what I call going batshit crazy, which I'm allowed to say because I have 3 bats at home. And this is where you give the opposite or the negative, or you counter the prevailing view. What if a beer company made an ad not about beer? So I'm going to go from my local to New Zealand. Skinny Telecom. What if we created a series of radio commercials without hiring any voice artists?
Please record your skinny radio ad after the beep.
Up around town. If you want to be in an ad, it is as simple as calling a number.
You phone this number and you then read the script that's on the poster to the voicemail.
To keep prices low, Skinny has placed this radio script in the theatre, on a Central City billboard, on the front page of a newspaper, and the hopes
That someone like me will call the number provided.
recorded on their mobile for free.
You may think I'm a fool for giving away my voice like this.
And they did it in such clever places. This is a wall next to an exotic dance club that I definitely wasn't just visiting. Very clever. So, here's my favorite one. This is what if I say exactly what they've told me I'm not allowed to say. Zander Morris, a couple of years ago, he was the valedictorian at Pine Lake High School in Florida. He was also the plaintiff in a court case against Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, which is referred to as the Parental Rights and Education Act, which is subsequently, unfortunately, passed. And he was told that under no circumstances could he use the word gay in his valedictorian speech. And so he did this, and I'm going to quote him. As you know, I have curly hair. I used to hate my curls. I spent mornings and nights embarrassed of them, trying desperately to straighten this part of who I am. But the daily damage of trying to fix myself became too much to endure. While having curly hair in Florida is difficult due to the humidity, I decided to be proud of who I was and came to school as my authentic self. There are going to be so many kids with curly hair who need a community like ours, and they won't have one. Instead, they'll try to fix themselves so they can exist in Florida's humid climate. That is how you, what if we do the thing they said we couldn't do? The best example of this is myth busting. Where is Dave? There you are. I'm not going to do my ozone layer. I'm going to talk to you about the penguin. When Dave found out where I come from, he said penguins, which I've never heard before in relation to South Africa, but it's true, they are penguins. And David also said to me, did I know that the Chinese word for penguin translates as business goose? Which is absolutely gorgeous, except not true. Sorry, David. So the Chinese word for penguin actually translates as tippy-toe goose. Myth-busting is the most wonderful use of the leap. So I'm not going to talk about CFCs because that's boring, and the business goose is much more interesting. Rather use that. But I will also say that you and your clients are sick of seasonal milestones. Christmas, Valentine's Day, Halloween. Since when is Halloween a thing in the UK? But it's everywhere. Everyone is saying the same shit at the same time of year. So if you're going to say something seasonal, flip it. Instead of Valentine's month, can we do I Heart Work? Okay, or what about November? Singles Day, 17th of November. Let's flip it. Bottom line, if you're stuck. Ooh, when you go into minus, it starts flashing. Bottom line, if you're stuck, is use the shrink. Okay, zoom in and in and in relentlessly. Go down research rabbit holes until you find associations that you can create overlaps with. Or flip the whole idea. Say what you're not supposed to say. Give the opposite. Change the orientation. While you're doing that, and Anna, you set this up so beautifully for me, use a notebook to capture your tinsel. Because even shit ideas are fertile soil for good ideas. Capture everything, even the bad stuff. Record keeping is a wonderful creativity-boosting competency, and so is surrounding yourself with novel stimuli. Like me, I suppose. So either say something no one else has ever said, or say something unoriginal in an original way, and the most novel stimulus I can think of is, of course, myself. So if you are going to Google me, that's how you spell it correctly, and thank you very much for your time.
Amazing. Copywriters, Tiffany Markman.